At my brother's birthday dinner, my dad raised a glass and said, "Derek, you're the real success of this family." Then he turned to me, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "And you're still a burden." I froze until my 8-year-old daughter stood up, napkin in hand, and said something that would change everything. That moment is burned into my memory, not because it was the first time my father had humiliated me, but because it was the first time someone had stood up for me. And that someone was my little girl. Let me back up and tell you how we got there. I'm Hannah Cole. I'm 34, divorced, and the mom of an amazing 8-year-old daughter named Lila. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. It's not glamorous and it's not stable. Some months, I'm juggling 3 clients just to make rent. Other months, I'm wondering if I'll have enough left over for groceries. But I do it because it lets me be home with Lila. It lets me be present in her life, something my parents never really were for me. You'd think my family would be proud of that. But in my father's eyes, none of that matters. In his world, success means money. It means titles. It means winning. And anything less than that makes you, well, a burden. My brother, Derek, is exactly what my dad wanted in a son. He's 36, runs his own tech company, drives a Tesla, and owns a house big enough to get lost in. Growing up, we were inseparable. But when Derek started rising through the ranks, our relationship changed. The gap between us widened, and my father made sure I felt every inch of that gap. He never misses a chance to remind me how I've fallen behind. Sometimes it's subtle, a backhanded compliment, a glance of pity. Other times, it's straight up cruel. I've learned to smile through it for my mom's sake, for Lila's, for peace. And then came the dinner. It was a few weeks ago, Derek's birthday. My parents insisted on hosting a big family dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and waiters who look down their noses if you order tap water. I almost didn't go. I really didn't want to. The thought of sitting through another evening of Derek's accolades while pretending my life wasn't falling apart made me sick to my stomach. But then, Lila came into my room that morning, holding a handmade birthday card she'd drawn for her uncle. "Mom, can we go? I want to give this to Uncle Derek." Her eyes were so bright, so hopeful. How could I say no? I told myself, one dinner. Smile through it. Leave early. When we arrived, the whole family was already there. My father, Martin Cole, sat at the head of the table, ex-military, posture like a stone pillar, voice that could silence a room. My mother, Patricia, was beside him, soft-spoken, always wringing her hands in her lap when the tension started to rise. Next to them was my Uncle Ray, my dad's younger brother. He's the one person in our family who's always had a kind word for me. Across from him sat Derek, glowing as usual with his girlfriend and a few of his business friends. And then there was us, me and Lila, tucked at the far end of the table like an afterthought. Dinner started off as expected. My dad dominated the conversation, boasting about Derek's latest contract, his growing client list, the new house renovations. My mom nodded along, eyes darting toward me but never saying a word. I tried to keep my focus on Lila, helping her cut her chicken, whispering little jokes to make her smile. Uncle Ray caught my eye once and gave me a small nod, as if to say, "Hang in there." Then came the toast. My dad stood, glass in hand, commanding attention as naturally as breathing. To Derek, he began, voice rich with pride, "The real success of this family, you make us proud every single day." I felt the familiar pang in my chest but forced a smile. Then, without missing a beat, he turned to me. "And you," he said, eyes locking onto mine like a laser, "you're still a burden." The words hit like a slap. The table fell silent. I felt the heat rise in my face, my throat tightening, my hands trembling beneath the tablecloth. Before I could even process what to do next, I felt a small tug at my sleeve. It was Lila. She looked up at me with her wide, earnest eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I show Grandpa what you've been hiding under this?" She held up her napkin. My heart stopped. And that, right there, is where everything changed. I wish I could tell you this was the first time my dad said something like that to me, but it wasn't. For as long as I can remember, I've been the family disappointment. I'm Hannah Cole, 34 years old, single mom, freelance graphic designer, and according to my father, a walking cautionary tale. Growing up, I was the dreamer, the kid who painted on the walls, who loved stories, who never quite fit into my dad's rigid vision of success. He was a career military man. Order, discipline, achievement. Emotions were weaknesses. Creativity? Frivolous. My mom, Patricia, was the opposite. She had a softness to her, a quiet warmth that made childhood bearable, but she was also afraid of my father. She'd shrink in his presence, smoothing over conflicts instead of standing up to him. I used to think that was love. Now I see it was survival. And then there was Derek, my older brother, 2 years ahead of me, but miles apart in our father's eyes. Derek was everything I wasn't: athletic, driven, obedient. He followed the plan, got a scholarship, built a company, bought the house, the car, the life. My dad beamed at every milestone. I faded into the background. We weren't always distant, though. As kids, we were inseparable. We built forts, rode bikes, snuck cookies from the kitchen. But somewhere along the way, around the time I chose art school over business school, things shifted. Dad's approval became a prize we both competed for, but only Derek ever won. I chose a different path. And for that, I've paid in full. I got married young to someone I thought loved me. He didn't. By the time Lila was born, the cracks were too deep. I left him when she was 2. Since then, it's been just the 2 of us. Freelancing wasn't part of the grand life plan, it was survival. I had to find something flexible enough to keep food on the table and be home for my daughter. Some weeks are good, some aren't, but I get to be here when Lila needs me. That's worth more than any paycheck. Still, try explaining that to my dad. To him, success is numbers, titles, applause. Not love, not resilience, not raising a child on your own with no help. When the invitation came for Derek's birthday dinner, I almost deleted it. I knew what it would be. Another night of being reminded of how far I've fallen. Another evening of watching my brother get crowned the family's pride and joy while I played the role of tolerated failure. But Lila had other ideas. She found the invite on the kitchen counter and immediately lit up. "Mom, it's Uncle Derek's birthday. Can we go? I want to give him a card." I hesitated. I wanted to protect her from the looks, the comments, the subtle ways my family could make you feel small. But I also didn't want to teach her to hide. Not from them, not from anyone. So I smiled and said yes. We spent the afternoon making a card together. Lila poured her heart into it, drawing stars and balloons, writing "Happy Birthday, Uncle Derek" in her best handwriting. Watching her beam with pride reminded me of what really matters. I told myself, one dinner, smile through it, leave early. As we got ready, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Tired eyes, faded jeans, a sweater that had seen better days, not the picture of success my father expected. But then Lila ran in, twirling in her polka dot dress, clutching the card to her chest. "You look beautiful, Mommy," she said. And for a moment, I believed it. We arrived at the restaurant, one of those places where the lighting is dim and the air smells like money. My stomach was in knots. Inside, the family was already gathered. Dad sat at the head of the table, posture straight as always. Mom was beside him, nervously smoothing her napkin. Uncle Ray gave me a warm smile as we approached. Derek looked polished and effortless in his tailored suit, surrounded by his latest business partners and his girlfriend. I felt out of place the moment I sat down. Conversations swirled about investments, property deals, travel plans. I focused on helping Lila with her menu, grateful for the small anchor she provided. Dad barely acknowledged us when we arrived. Typical. Mom gave me a quick hug, but avoided eye contact. Uncle Ray leaned over and whispered, "Good to see you here." Dinner unfolded as expected. Derek's accomplishments took center stage. Dad beamed with pride, punctuating every story with praise. I smiled where appropriate, kept my head down, tried to be invisible. But under the table, Lila squeezed my hand every so often. Her small, steady grip reminded me, "You're not alone." Then came the moment that would change everything. Dad rose for a toast. To Derek, the real success of this family. The words cut deeper than usual. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Then he looked at me. "And you're still a burden." The room went silent. My heart pounded in my ears. I stared at my plate, blinking back tears. That's when I felt Lila tug on my sleeve. "Mom, can I show Grandpa what you've been hiding under this?" She held up her napkin, eyes shining with quiet determination. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just another dinner. Something extraordinary was about to happen. As soon as Lila whispered those words, "Can I show Grandpa what you've been hiding under this?" my mind started racing. I had no idea what she meant. There was nothing under her napkin, at least not that I had placed there. For a split second, I wondered if this was her way of defusing the moment, changing the subject in that pure, innocent way children sometimes do. But when I looked at her, I saw something else entirely. Resolve. She wasn't trying to escape the moment. She was about to step right into the middle of it. Before I could stop her, Leela stood up on her chair, napkin in hand. Her small frame seemed impossibly tall in that cold, elegant restaurant. I instinctively reached to pull her back down. "Lila, honey, sit down, it's okay," I whispered urgently. But she shook her head, eyes locked on my father at the head of the table. "Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "can I show you something?" The table went still. My father looked at her with a mixture of confusion and irritation. He was used to controlling every moment, every conversation. An 8-year-old challenging him wasn't in the script. "Lila," he said sharply, "sit down." Adults are talking. That tone. I'd heard it my whole life. The tone that could shut down a room with 3 words. But this time, it wasn't me on the receiving end. It was my daughter. And to my astonishment, she didn't flinch. "No, Grandpa," she said. "I want to show you something important." The entire table was watching now, my mother, pale and wide-eyed, Uncle Ray leaning forward with interest, Derek and his friends, suddenly silent, and me, frozen with a mix of fear and awe. I opened my mouth to speak to somehow save her from what felt like an inevitable scolding. But before I could, Uncle Ray caught my eye and gave the smallest shake of his head, as if to say, "Let her." Lila carefully unfolded her napkin, and there it was. A small, crumpled drawing, one I hadn't even realized she'd tucked into her lap. I recognized it instantly. She had drawn it a few days earlier while I was working late into the night on a client project. She'd asked if she could stay up with me, and I had reluctantly agreed. While I hunched over my laptop, fighting deadlines, she sat beside me at the kitchen table, crayons in hand. Now, here it was, center stage at the dinner table. It was a simple drawing. Childish, colorful, but it spoke louder than any words I could have mustered. In the picture, she had drawn me sitting at my computer, headphones on, surrounded by bright swirls and stars. Above my head, in uneven, determined letters, were the words, "My hero." The room seemed to hold its breath. Lila held the drawing up for everyone to see. "Grandpa," she said, voice steady, "Mom works so hard every day. She helps people with their art. She makes beautiful things. And even when she's tired, she takes care of me. She's the best mom ever, not a burden. You should be proud of her. I am." A stunned silence followed. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a lump forming in my throat. I glanced around the table. My father stared at Lila, mouth slightly open, as if searching for a response that wouldn't come. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to meet my gaze. And Uncle Ray, he smiled, a slow, proud smile, and began to clap. Softly at first, then louder until others hesitantly followed. Lila looked at me then, her eyes shining with love and fierce determination. I reached out and pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly. "You are so brave," I whispered, voice breaking. "I love you so much." In that moment, the air in the room shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a mother, a woman who had built something far more valuable than my father's narrow definition of success. I had built love, strength, resilience, and I had passed that on to my daughter. But the moment wasn't over yet. I could see it in my father's eyes. Something was unraveling behind them. Whether it was shame, regret, or stubbornness refusing to bend, I didn't know. All I knew was that my daughter had done what I never could. She had stood up to him, for me, and everything in that room had changed. For a moment after Lila's words, it felt like time stopped. There she was, 8 years old, standing tall in her little polka dot dress, holding that crumpled drawing like a shield. My heart swelled with so many emotions at once: pride, love, fear, and guilt. Because as brave as Lila was in that moment, part of me still wanted to pull her back down, to shield her from the fallout I feared would come. I had spent my entire life trying not to provoke my father's wrath. I knew how sharp his words could get when he felt challenged, but Lila didn't know that. Or maybe, in her own innocent way, she did, and she didn't care. I held her close for a second, whispering, "Sweetheart, thank you. That was so beautiful." But I could feel the shift around the table. Everyone was watching. The room, once full of forced smiles and polite conversation, was now tense and brittle, as if one wrong word might shatter it completely. I looked at my father. For the first time I could remember, he didn't have a response ready. His jaw was clenched, eyes narrowed. That was the moment I realized something crucial. If I didn't say anything now, if I let the silence win, the lesson Lila had just taught would be lost. She had been brave enough to speak her truth. I owed it to her, and to myself, to do the same. I took a breath. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I spoke. "Dad," I began, "Lila is right." He shifted in his seat as if preparing to dismiss me, but I kept going. "For years, I've let you make me feel like I'm not enough, like I failed, like nothing I do matters because I didn't take the path you wanted." I glanced at Derek, who looked down at his plate, suddenly very interested in the half-eaten filet in front of him. "But here's the thing," I continued. "Success isn't just about money or status. It's about who you are when no one is watching. It's about how you treat the people you love. It's about raising a daughter who knows her worth and who isn't afraid to stand up for what's right." I squeezed Lila's hand. She beamed up at me, and I could feel her tiny fingers tightening around mine. I turned back to my father. "You can call me a burden all you want, but I know who I am. And more importantly, Lila knows who I am. That matters more to me than any approval you've withheld." There, I'd said it. The table remained frozen in silence. My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Uncle Ray leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, nodding ever so slightly in quiet support. Then, unexpectedly, Uncle Ray spoke. "Martin," he said, voice calm but firm, "I think it's time you started seeing your daughter for who she really is. She's raised a remarkable little girl, and she's done it with grace and strength you clearly don't understand." I wasn't sure if my father would explode, argue, or simply walk out, but what he did next surprised me. He looked away. Not at me, not at Lila, just somewhere off into the distance, as if trying to gather himself. Finally, he muttered, "Fine. Believe what you want." It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was the first time he hadn't doubled down after being confronted. And for me, that was enough, because this wasn't about changing him anymore. It was about standing tall, for myself, for Lila, and showing her that we don't have to shrink ourselves for anyone, not even family. I leaned down to Lila and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." She smiled up at me. "I'm proud of you too, Mommy." That was the moment everything shifted inside me. For so long, I'd been waiting for my father to change, to finally see me, to give me the validation I craved. But I didn't need that anymore. My daughter saw me. She believed in me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only approval I ever truly needed. The rest of the dinner passed in an awkward haze. Conversations resumed in stilted tones. My father stayed mostly silent. I kept my focus on Lila, who chatted happily with Uncle Ray and my mother, blissfully unaware of the waves she had created. When the check finally came, I didn't wait for the usual polite goodbyes. I gathered our things, took Lila's hand, and stood. As we walked toward the door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Uncle Ray. "You've raised one hell of a daughter," he said softly. "That's real success, Hannah. Don't you ever forget it." I smiled through tears. "Thank you." And with that, Lila and I stepped out into the night, together, stronger than ever. Walking out of that restaurant with Lila's small hand in mine, I felt lighter than I had in years. I should have been exhausted, emotionally drained from the confrontation, from the weight of my father's words. But instead, I felt free. Because something extraordinary had happened that night. Not just in what Lila said, or even in the fact that I had finally spoken up, but in the quiet shift that followed. For so long, I had believed my father's voice defined my worth. Every cruel word stuck to me like burrs I couldn't shake off. Even when I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, deep down it did. But in one moment, my 8-year-old daughter had done what I never could. She had stood up and said, "No, you're wrong about my mom, and more importantly, I know who she is." That moment cracked something open, not just in me, but in that whole room. As we reached the parking lot, the cool night air washed over us. I could finally breathe again. I crouched down so I was eye level with Lila. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice soft, "do you know how proud I am of you?" She tilted her head. "For what?" "For being brave, for standing up when it was hard, for telling the truth, even when grown-ups didn't want to hear it." She shrugged, as if it had been the most natural thing in the world. "I just didn't want Grandpa to be mean to you anymore." Tears stung my eyes. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "You are so strong, Lila," I whispered. "And you reminded me tonight that I can be strong too." As I stood and unlocked the car, a voice called out behind us, "Hannah, wait." As I stood and unlocked the car, a voice called out behind us, "Hannah, wait." It was Uncle Ray. He jogged over, a little breathless. His words were quiet but firm. "You have no idea what that meant in there," he said. "You've raised an incredible girl." I smiled. "She teaches me more every day than I could ever teach her." He hesitated, then glanced back toward the restaurant. "Martin may never admit it out loud," he said, "but you shook something in him tonight. We all saw it." I wanted to believe that, but more importantly, I didn't need to. For the first time, his reaction didn't define the worth of what had just happened. Uncle Ray reached into his pocket and handed me a small, folded note. "I didn't want to say this in front of everyone," he said, "but you've always been stronger than you know." Then he nodded at Lila. "And clearly, the next generation's going to be even stronger." I thanked him, and we said goodbye. As we drove home, Leela chatted excitedly about how grown-ups should always listen to kids, and how she wanted to draw another picture to hang on the fridge when we got back. But when she finally dozed off in her car seat, her head lolling against the window, I let myself really feel it, the release. The truth was, I had spent years trying to shield Lila from the worst parts of my family dynamic. I had bent over backwards to protect her from my father's harshness, thinking that was what a good mother did. But in doing so, I had underestimated her strength, her clarity. She had shown me that night that the best way to protect her, and myself, was to stop shrinking in the face of cruelty. When we got home, I carried her inside, tucked her into bed, and kissed her forehead. Then I sat down in the living room, unfolded the note Uncle Ray had given me. Inside were just a few handwritten words. "Don't let anyone define your worth, not even family. You already know who you are, and so does your daughter. That's enough." I sat there for a long time, the words sinking in. It wasn't about my father. It never really had been. It was about me, about the voice I'd allowed to drown out my own for too long, and it was about what I wanted to model for Lila from now on. That night, something changed between us, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a deep, quiet one. She had stood for me, and I had stood with her, and that bond, that unshakable trust, was the real victory. Success, in my father's world, was built on power and status. In mine, it was built on love, on courage, on raising a child who knows that kindness and strength can coexist, and that is a success I will never again be ashamed of. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, soft and warm. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I woke up without that familiar knot of dread sitting in my stomach. Lila was already awake, curled up in her blanket fort in the living room, crayons scattered everywhere. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, she looked up at me with a wide grin. "Mommy, can I show you my new drawing?" I smiled and sat beside her. She held up a fresh sheet of paper. This time, it was a picture of the two of us holding hands, standing tall, with the words, "Me and my strong mommy," written across the top in her bubbly handwriting. I blinked back tears. She had no idea just how deeply her words and her courage had reached me the night before. "Lila," I said softly, pulling her into my lap, "you are the bravest girl I know." She giggled. "I learned it from you." I held her tighter, my heart swelling with a kind of pride I'd never felt before. Because that was the real shift, not what happened at the dinner table, not whether my father ever admitted he was wrong, but this connection, this knowing. For the first time, I saw myself through Lila's eyes, not as a failure or a burden, but as a woman doing her best, as a mom worth looking up to, and that was enough. Later that day, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Last night gave me a lot to think about. I'm proud of you. I should have said it sooner." I sat with that message for a long time, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to be angry, to ask why it had taken so long, but another part of me, the part that was tired of carrying bitterness, chose a different path. "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot." I didn't need more. I didn't need an apology from my father or validation from anyone else at that table. I had my daughter's love. I had my voice back. That night had reminded me of a truth I had nearly forgotten. I am enough, just as I am, and my worth is not up for debate. I also realized how easily we can inherit the voices of those who try to diminish us, if we let them. I'd spent years thinking I was shielding Lila from that toxicity, but I hadn't been shielding myself. And kids notice more than we think. She had stood up that night not just for me, but for the version of me she saw, the version I needed to remember. Later that week, Uncle Ray called. "I hope you know," he said, "that what happened at that dinner will ripple through this family for a long time." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. Whether my father changed or not was no longer my concern. The ripple that mattered most had already begun, in me and in my daughter. From that day forward, I stopped apologizing for my life, for my choices, for the fact that my version of success didn't look like Derek's, and I stopped waiting for my father's approval. Instead, I started focusing on showing Lila that strength comes in many forms, that standing up for yourself and others is always worth it, even when your voice shakes. That love matters more than status. That kindness is not weakness. We hung her drawing on the fridge that week, right where I could see it every morning, me and my strong mommy. It reminds me daily that I have already achieved the most important success of all, raising a child who knows her voice matters, a child who will walk through this world with courage and compassion. And every time I see that picture, I remember the lesson I want her to carry always. No one, not even the people who love you the least, gets to define your worth. You do. And when you know who you are, no voice, no matter how loud, can take that away from you. That night changed so much for me. I stopped living under someone else's definition of success, and I started believing in the version of myself my daughter already saw. If this story resonated with you, even a little, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people hear stories like this. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to define your worth? Share your story in the comments below. Let's support each other. And if you want to hear more real, honest stories about family, courage, and finding your voice, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are enough.